Most people right now are locked in on the storms, and they should be. Thursday through Saturday is going to be dangerous, and I've covered that in detail in my recent videos. But I want to talk to you today about something that almost nobody is discussing right now. Something that is quietly building in the background while everyone is watching the radar. The atmosphere is about to flip. And I don't mean that casually. I mean that after one of the most relentlessly active, punishing stretches of severe weather this country has experienced in years, the outbreak that just seems like it will never end, the pattern is showing very clear signs of wanting to make a dramatic shift heading into early May. And that shift is going to surprise a lot of people. Because it's not just a brief break between storm systems. It looks like something bigger. A fundamental reset. And what comes after that reset, the summer pattern that's starting to take shape in the background, is something every single person in this country needs to understand right now. So today we're going to zoom out, way out, beyond the next 48 hours. We're going to talk about the big picture, what this pattern shift means, who wins, who still needs to be worried, and what the atmosphere is actually telling us about where we're headed over the next several weeks and months. This is the video I've been waiting to make for a while. Let's get into it. Before I explain the shift, I need to paint the picture of what we're actually shifting away from, because the scale of what has happened this spring is genuinely extraordinary, and most people don't have a full grasp of it. Let me give you some numbers. By April 19th, before this current outbreak even fully developed, the National Weather Service office in Chicago had already confirmed more than 20 tornadoes within their single forecast area, a number that in most years represents an entire year of activity for that office. They issued a record 128 severe thunderstorm and tornado warnings before April 20th. A record. The single highest number ever recorded through that date in history for that office. Nationally, the pace has been similarly relentless. An EF3 through Kankakee, Illinois, potentially record-shattering 6-inch hailstones in the same area. Tornadoes confirmed through Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, Michigan, Indiana, Missouri. Multiple people killed. Entire neighborhoods with roofs ripped off. Streets buried in debris. A squall line with winds over 80 mph tearing through communities while people were asleep. And if that wasn't enough, this current sequence, Thursday through Saturday, is throwing yet another punch at the central U.S. with MUKP values between 2,000 and 3,000 joules per kilogram on Saturday alone. A 30% severe weather risk area already posted for southwest Kansas into east central Oklahoma, and a setup that forecasters are describing as one of the most organized multi-day outbreaks of the entire season. This has been a spring that has not let up. A spring that has beaten this region of the country over and over and over again. So, when I tell you the pattern is about to shift, when I tell you something is changing, I want you to understand how significant that is, and how many people have been waiting and praying for exactly this kind of atmospheric relief. Here is what the models are showing and what the NWS Weather Prediction Center's extended forecast discussion from yesterday evening confirms. After this weekend's severe weather sequence winds down, after the Saturday night squall line pushes east and the cold front drags through the southern plains, the large-scale upper-level pattern is going to do something it has been refusing to do for most of the last 6 weeks. It is going to allow a ridge of high pressure to build and consolidate. Now, I know that word, ridge, might not mean much to you right now. So let me explain what a ridge is, because understanding this is the key to understanding the entire shift I'm talking about. A ridge is the opposite of a trough. Where a trough is a dip in the jet stream that steers storm systems southward and unleashes cold air and energy into the central U.S., a ridge is an upward bulge, a dome of high pressure in the upper atmosphere that acts like a wall. It deflects storm systems. It locks out cold air. It suppresses storm development underneath it. It is, in the simplest possible terms, the thing that makes the weather stop being angry. And starting around late next week, with increasing confidence in the guidance, a ridge wants to build across the central and western United States. The WPC extended forecast discussion from just yesterday noted that model guidance is remaining reasonably well clustered with this large-scale pattern evolution, which is meteorologist language for we're getting more confident this is actually going to happen. What does this mean on the ground? For areas that have been getting hammered, the Kansas City area, Oklahoma City, Des Moines, St. Louis, the entire I-35 corridor, this means a window of relative quiet. It means temperatures rising, skies clearing, and the jet stream retreating northward. The active storm track, which has been parked right over the central U.S. for most of April, shifts north and eventually east. The severe weather threat does not vanish. It never completely does in late spring, but it relaxes. For communities that have spent the last month dealing with tornado sirens and flooding and hail damage and downed power lines, this is not a small thing. This is the atmospheric equivalent of someone finally turning off the noise. But And here's where the surprise part really comes in. This is not just a pleasant break. This ridge has much bigger implications, and that's what I want to spend the rest of this video explaining, because what's building on the other side of this shift could affect your entire summer. Okay, here's where I need your full attention, because this is the part of the story that very few people are connecting right now. While everyone has been watching the severe weather, and rightfully so, something has been quietly happening in the background across large portions of this country. And it's been happening for months. It didn't start last week or last month. It started last winter. As of the most recent drought monitor data, approximately 60% of the contiguous United States is experiencing drought conditions. 60%. That is one of the highest drought coverage percentages this country has seen in more than 3 years. And the worst of it is concentrated in exactly the regions that have been getting hit the hardest by severe weather this spring: Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and extending into the Mid-South. Let me give you some numbers that are genuinely alarming. As of early April, 89% of Texas and 99% of Oklahoma were in some level of drought. Not a little dry. Not could use some rain. Drought. As of March 2026, over 1.1 million acres across the high plains had already burned in wildfires. Soil moisture across western Kansas and the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles was below the 10th percentile. The most widespread extreme drought was found across South Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Northwest Colorado, South Georgia, and Florida. And here's the really disturbing part. This winter was the warmest on record for Oklahoma and Texas. And February 2026 was the warmest February on record for Oklahoma, second warmest for Texas, third warmest for Kansas. We set up this spring with a dry, baked-out soil profile across much of the country before tornado season even started. So yes, the severe thunderstorms and flooding rains of April have put some water into portions of the central U.S. The violent storms that have been pounding Iowa and Missouri and Illinois have at least replenished some soil moisture in those specific areas. But across the western plains and most of Texas and Oklahoma and into the Mid-South, the drought has not been erased, not even close. And when that high-pressure ridge builds in and shuts off the storm track in early May, when the active weather finally goes quiet, the heat is going to turn on. And it is going to turn on fast. This is how heat waves develop. Not just because it's warm outside. It's because dry soil has no moisture to evaporate and cool the surface. When the ground is dry and a ridge parks overhead, incoming solar energy goes straight into heating the air instead of evaporating water. There's no natural air conditioning. The heat amplifies. And right now, across a huge portion of this country, the soil profile is primed for exactly that feedback loop. NOAA's NWS Central Region Climate Outlook, released just 3 days ago on April 20th, is projecting above normal temperatures for May through July across the plains, the South, and much of the central U.S., with an ongoing plains drought specifically highlighted as a key factor. And that projection was made with full knowledge of the active weather we've been seeing in April. They already accounted for it, and they still see a warm, increasingly dry summer ahead for much of this region. Now, I have to talk about something even bigger, because this is the piece of the puzzle that ties everything together and explains why the shift we're about to see is not just temporary relief. It's the beginning of a season-long transformation of the U.S. weather pattern. La Nina is dead, or nearly so. For most of this past year, the tropical Pacific Ocean has been running cooler than average. That's La Nina. And that cooler Pacific has been one of the key drivers of the active, stormy, trough-dominated pattern we've been stuck in across the central U.S. this spring. La Nina typically favors exactly what we've been experiencing. An active jet stream, repeated storm systems pushing south through the plains, above average severe weather activity in the corridor, from Texas through the Midwest. But La Nina collapsed faster than expected this spring, and what's replacing it is genuinely extraordinary. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center put the probability of El Nino emerging by June through August at 62%. And the subsurface temperature data in the tropical Pacific right now, the water that's still beneath the surface but is working its way up, is running dramatically warm. A massive oceanic Kelvin wave is currently surfacing in the eastern Pacific. And some of the international forecast models, including analysis from Severe Weather Europe, are suggesting that this developing El Nino could reach what's called Super El Nino status by late 2026 or early 2027, on par with the historic events of 1997-98 and 2015-16 that fundamentally disrupted global weather patterns for over a year. Now, let me be transparent. El Nino's influence during the summer months is more subtle than in winter. And forecasting is less reliable right now because we're in what's called the spring predictability barrier, a period when the models are notoriously less reliable about NSO evolution. So I'm not here to tell you that a super El Nino is guaranteed. What I am telling you is that the signal is there, it's real, and it matters. Because here's what El Nino development means for the second half of your year. For the Atlantic hurricane season, El Nino is actually good news. El Nino increases wind shear over the Atlantic, which rips apart developing tropical systems before they can organize into major hurricanes. After the hyperactive and devastating 2024 and 2025 Atlantic hurricane seasons, a developing El Nino is one of the more encouraging things I can tell you. We could be looking at a significantly quieter hurricane season this year than the last two. For the western and southern U.S., El Nino eventually brings a shift toward wetter conditions in the southern tier. Potentially some drought relief for Texas and the southern plains, particularly heading into fall and the following winter. That's the silver lining. But for the northern U.S. and Pacific Northwest this summer, El Nino tends to bring warmer and drier conditions. And the transition period, right now as El Nino emerges, tends to bring exactly the kind of building ridge pattern over the west and central U.S. that we're about to see. That ridge is not a fluke. That ridge is, in part, the atmospheric fingerprint of a Pacific Ocean that is fundamentally reorganizing itself. Let me now break down the specific surprises in this pattern shift, region by region, because the shift doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. If you live in Kansas City, Omaha, Des Moines, or anywhere along that corridor that has been getting pummeled for weeks, you are going to be surprised by how quickly the atmosphere calms down after this weekend. People have been in full defensive mode, watching radar constantly, tracking storm systems, living with that background hum of anxiety that comes with repeated severe weather events. And then, relatively abruptly, that's going to ease. Temperatures are going to climb. The sky is going to stop looking threatening. Some of you are going to feel almost disoriented by the quiet. Enjoy it, but understand what's underneath it, that drought is still there, the soil is still drying out, and the heat of summer is going to arrive with unusual intensity. This is the region I'm most concerned about for the summer, and it's also the region where people may be most caught off guard by the shift. Right now, parts of Texas and Oklahoma are getting hit with some rainfall from these severe weather events, enough to bring some temporary drought relief to a few lucky spots. But the broader drought across these states is deep and entrenched. Nearly all of Oklahoma is in drought. The soil moisture deficit is enormous. And the forecast, above normal temperatures for May through July, with below normal precipitation favored for the western portions of both states, does not paint an encouraging picture. What may feel like a finally getting some rain moment this spring is going to transition fairly quickly into a hot, dry, grinding summer. Farmers in this region especially need to be paying attention to this right now. The window to plant into workable soil moisture conditions is narrow, and it is closing. Here's some genuinely good news. The seasonal forecasts for the upper Midwest and Great Lakes region, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, show above normal precipitation probability heading into May and June. This region has been the front line for severe weather this spring, and it has taken a beating. But unlike Texas and Oklahoma, the moisture balance here is not catastrophically depleted, and the seasonal pattern favors continued above normal rainfall into early summer. The active storm track may shift south and west as the ridge builds, but it doesn't disappear from this region. Cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Minneapolis are actually looking at a May that runs near normal to wetter than normal, which is not at all what most people are expecting after a month of violent storms. The Northeast is about to experience something that genuinely surprises people, a warmth surge. As the ridge builds over the central U.S. and the jet stream retreats northward, a plume of warm air is going to push into the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, potentially bringing temperatures well above normal for early May. Cities like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, which have been running cooler than average through much of April thanks to the active trough pattern, are going to see a fairly dramatic warm-up. This is a classic downstream effect of a strengthening western ridge. The jet buckles upstream over the west, and the warmth spills eastward like water pouring over a dam. And then there's the west. And this is where I have to be honest with you about something uncomfortable. We already saw, in late March 2026, what happens when a heat dome parks over the western United States in an era of climate change and historic drought. Yuma, Arizona hit 109 degrees Fahrenheit, a new national March record. Phoenix tied its all-time April high in March. World Weather Attribution released a rapid study calling that heat wave virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. Scientists called it one of the 6 most astonishing weather events of this century. And with the western snowpack running well below normal, in many basins, less than 25% of normal due to that March heat wave triggering an abnormally early meltdown. The water supply situation in the west heading into summer is genuinely serious. The drought there is not going to be fixed by a ridge building in May. It's going to be made worse. The soil moisture that was supposed to come from snowmelt feeding rivers and reservoirs through late spring and early summer simply isn't there this year. When that ridge amplifies over the west in May and June, and there's no soil moisture left to provide evaporative cooling, the heat will build fast and build hard. I want to step back now and tell you what I see when I put all of these pieces together, because I think it tells a coherent and important story about where this country's weather is heading. We are at a pivot point. The first 4 months of 2026 have been defined by a La Nina-driven, trough-dominated, violently active weather pattern that has pounded the central U.S. with historic severe weather, produced the most extreme March heat wave in recorded history in the West, and left the country with drought covering 60% of its landmass heading into the warmer season. Now, the atmosphere is beginning to reorganize. La Nina is collapsing. El Nino is building in the Pacific. The ridge wants to assert itself. And as that transition happens, the character of the weather is going to change. Not necessarily by becoming safer or gentler overall, but by shifting from the violent, chaotic trough pattern we've been stuck in to a different kind of dangerous, the slow, grinding, record-breaking heat and drought of a summer supercharged by a historically warm ocean. The storms that have defined this spring, the tornadoes, the hail, the squall lines, they were the atmosphere burning off energy in one extremely dramatic way. What comes next may not look as dramatic on radar. It won't necessarily generate the same moment-to-moment urgency. But for farmers watching crops wither, for cities watching reservoir levels fall, for families watching their electric bills climb during triple-digit heat waves, the summer ahead could be just as impactful as the spring that preceded it. This is the weather shift that is about to surprise everyone. Not because nobody saw it coming. Some forecasters absolutely did. But because after weeks of watching the radar for the next tornado threat, people are going to let their guard down. They're going to see the severe weather quiet down and breathe a sigh of relief. And I understand that completely. That relief is earned. That relief is deserved. But I want you to exhale and then look up. Because the atmosphere is not done with us. It's just switching gears. Here's your bottom line for today. Thursday, April 23rd, 2026. The immediate priority is still this weekend's severe weather sequence. Thursday through Saturday is dangerous across the central and southern plains and into the mid-south. Stay prepared. Stay connected to warnings. Have your shelter plan ready. I will have updates on that as the setup evolves. But beyond this weekend, a real and meaningful pattern shift is coming. A ridge builds, the storm track quiets, the heat turns on, and in the background of all of it, an El Nino is emerging in the Pacific that is going to reshape the weather patterns for the rest of this year and possibly well into 2027. For the drought-stricken plains and south, the summer ahead looks genuinely difficult. For the west, it may be the most challenging fire and water supply season in years. For the Atlantic hurricane season, there's actually some rare good news as El Nino suppresses tropical development. And for all of us, the transition we're about to experience is a reminder that the atmosphere is never truly quiet. It just shifts from one kind of extreme to another. Stay weather aware, not just this week, all season. I'll see you in the next one.